Jonathan Watt with Atara Group International. We hope you're enjoying the content that we're posting, and if you are and want to support this ministry, please press the like button and subscribe to our channel. We're talking about different aspects of church history and want to spend a little bit of time with the significance of Holy Week and what it means in the Christian church, past as well as present. Christians around the world, Holy Week represents the most sacred period of the liturgical year. So observed in the days leading up to Easter, Holy Week commemorates the final events in the life and regular ministry of Jesus Christ on earth, including his triumphal entry into Jerusalem, his last meal with his disciples, his crucifixion, and ultimately his resurrection as well. So the observance of Holy Week brings together several key celebrations, and they include Palm Sunday, Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, and Holy Saturday, each commemorating a pivotal moment of some sort in the entire Passion narrative. Now, over nearly 2,000 years, the Christian church has developed rich traditions and liturgies and devotional practices to remember these events. So, understanding the history of Holy Week reveals how Christians across centuries have sought to reflect on the suffering and the sacrifice and the victory of Christ ultimately over all things. Let's talk a little bit about the biblical foundations for this so-called Holy Week. Its origins lie, not surprisingly, in the New Testament accounts of Jesus' final days in Jerusalem. And according to the four Gospels, Jesus entered the city riding a donkey while crowds greeted him with cut palm branches and shouts of praise. You can read the details in the Gospels of Matthew chapter 21, Mark chapter 11, Luke chapter 19, and John chapter 12. And the event is remembered today as Palm Sunday. And then in the days that followed, Jesus taught in the temple, shared a final meal with his disciples, often referred to as the Last Supper, and then was eventually arrested, tried, and crucified under the authority of the Roman governor Pontius Pilate. The narrative culminates in the resurrection on Easter morning, which Christians believe confirms Jesus' victory over sin and death. So, these events altogether form the theological heart of Christianity itself. And as a result, the church developed ways to commemorate them annually through liturgical observances, for example, that allow believers to enter into the story of Christ's passion for themselves. So in the earliest centuries of Christianity, believers focused primarily on celebrating the resurrection of Christ during Easter. So over time, however, Christians began to observe the events leading up to Easter with increasing detail and devotion. Now, by the 4th century, Jerusalem had become a bit of a center for elaborate Holy Week observances. A Christian pilgrim named Egeria recorded in her travel diary detailed descriptions of the services she was observing here, and did so around the year 380. And according to her account, believers gathered at various locations associated with the final days of Jesus' life and reenacted the events through scripture readings and prayer, and then the processions they did together. So, for example, on Palm Sunday, Christians walked from the Mount of Olives into Jerusalem, carrying branches symbolically retracing Jesus' entry into the city that final time. On Good Friday, they would gather near the site believed to be Golgotha, where the crucifixion took place, so they could hear the Passion narrative read and they could venerate the cross. And these early practices laid the foundation for the liturgical traditions that then later spread throughout the Christian world. So let's talk about the development of the liturgical week. As Christianity expanded across the Roman Empire and beyond, churches began adopting and adapting the Jerusalem pattern of Holy Week observances. And by the Middle Ages, the structure of the week had become, if you will, more standardized. Palm Sunday marked the beginning of Holy Week with processions and the blessing of palm branches. The celebration reflected both the joy of Christ's arrival in Jerusalem and the anticipation of the suffering that was soon to follow. Then there's what's called Maundy Thursday. It commemorated the Last Supper, during which time Jesus instituted the Eucharist, and he also washed his disciples' feet. Now, many churches incorporated foot washing ceremonies into their own worship to emphasize humility and servant leadership. Now, Good Friday focused on the crucifixion of Christ through solemn services that included readings and passion narratives, and for many, veneration of the cross as well. Following that, Holy Saturday, which served as a day of quiet reflection and preparation for the celebration of the resurrection, which was about to take place in commemoration. So in many traditions, the Easter Vigil held on Saturday night became one of the most significant services of the year, symbolizing the transition from darkness into light. Now, there were medieval Holy Week traditions that went beyond this. During the medieval period, Holy Week observances became more elaborate and more widely practiced across Europe. And churches developed dramatic liturgies and devotional practices that allowed congregations and their congregants to experience the Passion story ever more vividly. So, for example, one influential development was what's called the Stations of the Cross, series of meditations tracing the journey of Jesus from his condemnation to his burial, originally inspired by pilgrimages to Jerusalem's Via Dolorosa, and these stations enabled believers in distant lands to spiritually follow Christ's path to the cross, albeit being developed after the 11th century in Roman Catholicism in particular. Now, for many places, there became the use of public processions. Passion plays also became more common, and these dramatic reenactments helped communicate the story of Holy Week to largely illiterate populations, reinforcing both theological teaching but also communal identity. Now, there were changes during the Reformation. The Protestant Reformation in the 16th century and beyond brought significant changes to the observances of Holy Week in many parts of Europe. So reformers like Martin Luther, as we've noted, emphasized scripture and preaching, and often simplifying or removing elaborate rituals. Now, in many Protestant traditions, Holy Week services focused on, therefore, reading the Passion narratives and then inviting people to reflect on Christ's sacrifice through the sermons and the hymns that were being brought into the worship. Meanwhile, Roman Catholic and Orthodox churches preserved many traditional liturgical practices, including processions, venerations of the cross, and the Easter Vigil as well. Now, despite all these differences, Christians across denominations continue to recognize Holy Week as the central period of reflection on Christ's death and resurrection, and this is recognized around the world today. Holy Week is celebrated globally by Roman Catholic and Orthodox and Anglican and Lutheran and Protestant churches in general. And while traditions vary across culture, the central themes remain consistent: remembrance, reflection, and renewal. And in many parts of the world, yes, large public processions mark the events of Holy Week. Cities in Spain, Mexico, and the Philippines, for example, host dramatic reenactments of the Passion and attract thousands of participants and observers for these particular events. In other contexts, congregations observe the week through quieter services with prayer, scripture reading, reflection, Many churches hold special worship gatherings on each day of the week, inviting believers to walk step by step through the events that were leading up to the resurrection of Jesus on that first day of the new week. So these practices demonstrate how Holy Week continues to connect Christians across cultures and centuries with the central story of the Christian faith. There's a theological significance and thread that run through all of them. Holy Week carries profound theological meaning for Christians and highlights the central message of the gospel, that through suffering, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, humanity is being offered redemption and reconciliation with God. The events remembered during this week reveal the depth of divine love, the cost of sacrifice, and the promise of a new life. And for believers, Holy Week is not merely a historical remembrance, but it's a spiritual journey. It's an opportunity to reflect on their own faith and their relationship with God. And so by moving from the celebration of the Palm Sunday to the sorrow of Good Friday and finally to the joy of Easter, Holy Week embodies this Christian conviction that hope and redemption can emerge from suffering and despair. Now, we'd like to invite you to join the conversation. The history of Holy Week shows how Christians across generations and across cultures have sought to remember and embody the story of Christ's passion and resurrection. But we'd like to ask you, what other traditions or moments in church history would you like us to explore? Are there particular figures or events or theological developments that interest you? We invite you to share your ideas and suggestions in the comments below so that we can continue exploring the rich and the fascinating history of the Christian church together. Atara Group International is about supporting leadership and ministry, and if you're church or nonprofit organization or ministry is seeking support in strengthening leadership or developing programs or nurturing healthy ministry environments, Atara is experienced in offering guidance and practical support, and the service includes leadership staff training, grant writing, keynote speaking, coaching, pastoral care, and retreat and conference leadership. Our goal is to help leaders and organizations to grow and serve effectively and expand their community in the communities we serve.